Hello and welcome to the home of the Ghost Owl, and here we are for another one of our videos. However, this one is going to be a little bit different. So I have a big passion for video games, as you can tell from the other videos on the channel, but my other passion is for board games, tabletop games, and card games. And as you can see behind me, on the wall over there's a big shelf full of boxed board games and starter boxes and all sorts. And I've been big into Games Workshop since I was a kid. I first started in around the sort of 1990, 1991, and was very much into Warhammer Fantasy Battle, with the first box set being that 4th edition box that came out in 1992. Collected thousands of models in Warhammer Fantasy Battle, sold some which I bitterly regret to this day when I joined the army. My God, those Dogs of War models, how I wish I had them back. Parazzo's Lost Legion, the Al-Qatani Fellowship, and so on. And you know, then obviously to see Warhammer Fantasy Battle eventually killed off. I have tried to play Age of Sigmar, and I just can't get into it. And don't get me wrong, I'm not a hater of the overall story of Age of Sigmar. You know, I do have a passion for the old world. Some of that clearly is nostalgia, but I did really enjoy reading the books like the Vampire Wars and and so on. So I really did enjoy those books. Malice Darkblade, and those. So to see it killed off was a bit of a shame. But I'm not totally against Age of Sigmar, but I've tried to play it. I tried to play all the editions that have come out, and I just can't get into the rule set. It just doesn't work for me, and that's just a personal thing and a completely separate discussion. But of course, for quite some time now, there have been announcements about bringing back the old world from the Forge World studio, kind of a bit more of a specialist game. It feels a lot like how they brought back the Horus Heresy. The old world obviously going to be set in a different period, and we've seen snippets of that. Now, I am super excited for this. Two of my biggest armies were Bretonnians and Tomb Kings. So you can imagine when they didn't make it to Age of Sigmar, I've had these models sitting around, and I've obviously got lots of classic models from that Warhammer Fantasy Battle period. So to see a game system and an updated rule set come back will be fantastic, particularly given that the 8th edition, you can go back and play old editions. The 8th edition really wasn't a favourite of mine. Two bigger units, 60, 80 Skaven slaves and other Death Star style units, the rank bonus, and the way magic works. So really, really excited to see the rule set. Now, I just thought that going forward, as things are revealed now in the old world, particularly given the recent post that came out on Warhammer Community, that we start to discuss some of the news, and I'm actually going to start looking to paint up a few of the models, or repaint a few of the models as well that I've got lying around in preparation. Maybe get an army ready for when this finally is released. And the reason I'm starting this now is there was a big post, Old World Development Diary of the main factions revealed, but there's quite some discussion on that, because there's main factions revealed, but there are key factions from, Warhammer Fantasy that aren't necessarily included, or included in the way that people thought. So I thought we'd have a bit of a look at what it says, what it means, what I think it means, and how I read into it, and see how things progress. And we'll keep an eye out for more news posts and follow up with some more videos on that. So, just starting, and I'm not going to read through the whole post, but just starting and looking at that initial bit, we've got the Old World Development Diary, the main factions revealed. So many distinct armies fighting over the Old World, you might be asking which factions would be the ones to feature in Warhammer the Old World. So we've seen a noble paladin of Bretonnia and a Tomb King, and you can imagine how exceedingly excited I was to see both of those armies with new models, who seems very upset to be awoken. So it's safe to assume that these two factions will feature prominently in this new game. But speculate no more, as the guys from the Warhammer Design Studio are here with a guide as who's in the era before the Siege of Prague. So, who, where, when? So, I think the interesting thing here as you go down through the post is, the game is set firmly in the old world. We knew that. The lands between Bretonnia and the west of the World Mountains, we knew that. During the decades immediately before the Great War against Chaos and Siege of Prague, we knew that. So, I think the interesting thing here is when we look at it, much of the action in the first wave of books and supplements. Right, first wave of books and supplements. Does that mean there will be a second wave? No guarantee. Clearly, it will depend upon how popular this becomes, because at the end of the day, Games Workshop is a business and they're there to make money. You can never forget that. But the fact they do say a first wave is that certainly I think it's in their minds. Maybe they've got some sort of, 5-year roadmap. Most businesses have a 5 to 10 year roadmap of what might look like, with assuming that there's a financial business case to support it, that we could see a second wave of books that will bring in potentially those factions that we don't see. So it doesn't mean they're dead and buried and gone forever. So clearly they're saying a first wave. There clearly could be more. So accordingly, they're going to be focusing on the 9 core factions. So let's have a look at what those factions are. Core factions, right? So you've got Empire of Man. Well, no surprises there. Dwarf and Mountain Holds. No surprises there. Bretonnia, we knew. Wood Elf and High Elves, I think, is a real interesting one. I was a little bit surprised to see the High Elves actually included in this first wave. You think, one, when you look at this, there's 9 factions on this sheet. They're releasing a game with 9 fully fleshed out factions straight away. That's pretty big, right? When you'd actually consider all the factions out there was no way they were ever going to release the game with all the factions and new models and all of that sort of thing and big books and everything else to go with it. There's no way. It's just too big, particularly when it isn't a flagship product. Let's not forget, Age of Sigmar is the flagship product. So I was surprised to see the High Elf realms in there. But no bad thing. No bad thing. I have plenty of those as well. And then if we look at the Orc and Goblin tribes, there's Warriors of Chaos, Beastmen, Brayherds, and Tomb Kings. It looks like they've been kind of organised in a bit of a good and evil, or an order destruction, however you want to term it. Interesting to see the way the Tomb Kings have kind of been put on there and so on. But overall, no major surprises. And I think one of the things to consider here is that if you look at all of these factions, probably with the exception of Warriors of Chaos, the bulk of these factions don't have existing models because they've been removed, right? They're no longer sold. Whereas if you take things like Dark Elves, Lizard Men have just had a release, or about to have a release, and so you look at some of the factions that aren't on here, they've actually got quite a few models in the Age of Sigmar range that can still be bought. Whereas if you look at things like Empire of Man, the Dwarves, Bretonians, obviously Tomb Kings, the classic Orc and Goblins, you can't get those models anymore. Certainly not easily, or they're quite expensive, or the kits are exceptionally old and almost not something you'd want to pick up. So, I think the interesting thing here is that we can sit there and go, that my faction isn't in that core faction list, but the factions presented here are the ones probably, and I think most in need of, with probably the exception of Warriors of Chaos, most in need of new models to enable people to make full and complete armies that would be playable. So those are the 9 core factions. Like I say, 9 core factions at release is no small amount of things when it isn't a flagship product. Okay, so as we move down, so we've got these armies will have rules published alongside the launch of the Old World and will be pivotal players in the events, in the narrative expansions and supplements. So it's only part of the narrative as well, right? So it's not necessarily saying that, that you can't just play your vampires or whatever. It's just saying that in terms of the narrative element and supplements, they're going to have that. Plus, there's going to be shiny new miniatures. So they make that clear that those 9 factions will receive some shiny new miniatures to accompany the return of some of the classic kits as well. So there you go. So decades immediately before the Siege of Prague, at the heart of the old world lies a sprawling empire of man, founded long ago by Sigmar, but long since divided. So this is before the empire is unified. There's no Karl Franz and so on. So it is set, well before when we were playing Warhammer Fantasy Battle 8th edition. So I'm not going to delve into all of the writing here. It's pretty clear what's there. I think the interesting thing is to see is what about the other factions? There's a lot of people out there that are going to be, they only have 1 or 2 armies, maybe, if any, and they're going to be sort of going, well, I'm left out, right? I'm not part of this. Dark Elves, Skaven, Vampire Counts. Those top 3 are 3 hugely popular armies. And always were hugely popular armies. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But Dark Elves, there's plenty of models for them still available. Skaven, Vampire Counts, Demons, of course, Ogres, Lizardmen with the new release. Chaos Dwarfs being probably the only one that now doesn't have those models, no longer being on Forge World. But becoming more popular because of the Total Warhammer game and recent expansion. So what does it say? It says certain factions people remember are not part of the narrative, right? But will be provided with rules at launch of the game. So if you do have these armies, or you want to build one of these armies with the models that currently exist in Age of Sigmar, or other alternative, let's not forget, I mean, there are plenty of other places you can pick up Dark Elf type models, vampire models, and so on, that they're going to get rules, right? So you can still play with your armies. There's nothing going to stop you. Does it mean that they're going to get updated? Well, let's have a look. These legacy faction army lists will be made available for free. So you're going to get them for free, right, as a service to fans who have the classic armies on the shelf. So, you're going to get it for free, so you only really have to get the main rulebook, right? If you're not interested in the factions that come in whatever starter box is going to be and so on, you're still going to get free PDF rules to pull your dusty armies out of the closet and put them on the table and have a damn good game. Now, does it mean they're not going to get updated over time? Probably not as often if we look at, other game systems where you've got legacy in the title of army rules. They don't tend to get updated on a regular basis. But, as I said, they talked about first wave of books. Could there be a second edition or a second wave? Yeah, absolutely. Would it be likely that second wave could be resurgent Vampire Counts or, Skaven coming back out or Dark Elves starting to raid Bretonnia and so on? Yeah, absolutely. So, how competitive do I think the old world's going to be at the beginning? I think, as with any game system that's coming back and essentially going to be new in a way, it's going to be a mishmash of rules from a bunch of previous editions. It's going to be rough to be fully balanced and competitive on the first edition anyway. So we'll see. We'll see how those legacy rules play out. But the fact it's got legacy in it, I wouldn't expect much, if any, update to those rules. It would have to be exceptionally broken, I think, for them to make any amendment to them during that sort of first edition until they get brought more into the fold of the game. So, they also make it clear we don't plan to publish rules for Warhammer Age of Sigmar miniatures. I don't think that's really a surprise. We're not going to see Vengorian Lords or any of that sort of thing from Age of Sigmar. Age of Sigmar still is the flagship product. They're not going to want to detract from that too much. So, I don't think that's a surprise. Plus, there's actually a lot of models out there in Age of Sigmar that you could just use as counts as too. There's some really cool vampire models, for example, that came with Warhammer Underworlds and so on. They would make great vampire lords in a vampire counts army, or vampire heroes. So, thralls and so on. So, I think, they're not going to make specific rules available, but I think there's some cool stuff that you could potentially use as counts as, using some of the Age of Sigmar models. And, unless you're playing ultra competitive, it's not going to matter too much if they're on a round or a square base. I have a bunch of models on round bases. I actually have some Phoenix Guard, for example, High Elf Phoenix Guard. They're on round bases. Well, it's going to be very easy to put magnets under those and put it on a metal movement tray, and they will be ranked up just as good as anyone on a square base. So I'd say unless you're playing ultra competitive, I don't see that being a major drama. I prefer my casual games. Right, okay, so let's move on. What does it say? So, why aren't these armies being included? I think that's the big thing. People are looking at it going, well, why aren't Skaven? Skaven's such a big faction, right? They're huge in Warhammer. Vampire Counts, oh my God, that's like, one of the most popular factions ever. And the Gash and so on. Well, why aren't they? So during the century before Siege of Prague, Skaven under Empire was riven by civil war, right? So they're saying they retreated from the surface world. And this is the origin of the belief that Skaven aren't real. So Skaven re-emerged only after the Horned Rat himself was summoned at Skavenblight. Okay, well, who's to say that after this first wave that we don't suddenly have an event that is the Skaven summoning the Horned Rat, Skavenblight, and Skaven become a faction that's then fully entered, brought into the game. It allows for that. So that can be done. The von Carsteins are all dead. Okay, Vlad's dead, Conrad's dead. Vlad doesn't come back until the end times. Manfred doesn't come back until for quite some time. So the vampires are in hiding. Yeah, it kind of makes sense. But they make it clear. Skaven. The Skaven re-emerged after the Horned Rat himself was summoned at Skavenblight. That could be an event. The von Carsteins waiting until the world became safe for them to emerge once more. That again could be an event, the return of Manfred, or whatever. There's events that you can see that are around some of these factions that could bring them into the fold. Dark Elves raiding Bretonnia. I think Lizard Men is more of a challenge. They tend to be hunkered in and around Lustria. So it'd be interesting to see what would come of that. Maybe you end up being some sort of expedition. Chaos Dwarves, Ogre Kingdoms, they were based far from the old world at this time and very inward-looking insular. But, there's no reason why they couldn't be brought back in some kind of event. So, and Chaos Demons have existed in the past and will again. So, your factions are not in there. But do I think they are not going to become part of it? I think if the old world as a game system becomes popular and a good financially viable business case to keep investing money in, we will absolutely see these factions in the future. I think there are a few interesting ways that the narrative for this post has been written. As I say, they make it clear about events where some of these factions could re-emerge. They make it clear it's a first wave of books, so there is the possibility of new books and narratives coming forward which would line with those events. And again, we look at it and you go, the core factions are the ones probably in most need of new models. So in my mind, it all makes sense. Yes, I own some of the factions in the core factions. I also own armies. And in fact, my biggest armies aren't actually here. I've got Tomb Kings and Bretonias. They're big armies for me. But I have tons of Dark Elves, tons of Vampire Counts, and a sizable force of Lizard Men. But I'm not actually upset on the way this has come out, because I do think they will be coming into the game. And at the end of the day, hey, we're getting free rules. We're getting free rules and army lists for them, so I can play them on day one, should I wish, when the game is released. So that's the latest post for Warhammer: The Old World. I do hope to do more of these articles and put my view and spin on what it says in these posts on Warhammer Community, tracking the point where the Old World will be released, and maybe in the meantime, if I can actually get to it and actually do some painting, then I might put up a video of some of the units that I'll be looking to take into the Old World in my army list. And I say round bases, square bases. At the moment, I'm not going to sit there and rebase a whole bunch of miniatures. I'm going to look to do magnets, which are really cheap on Amazon, with movement trays with a metal liner, and that will work just as well for rank and file games. And so, should be no problem and no need to do a whole bunch of extra work rebasing. I've got enough grey plastic without having to redo all the bases as well. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like it, then give it a thumbs down and let me know why in the comments down below. And I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts and views on this latest post of factions being revealed, who's in and who's out. And as always, if you want to see more content, please hit that subscribe button. It is free for you to do, but it means a huge amount for me. So thank you for that in advance. And if you do hit that subscribe button, you're going to get notifications of when there is new content available on the channel. You've been watching The Ghost Owl, and I'll see you very soon.